Hello everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. This session is cyber safety, teens online, and how we can support our screenagers. My name is Jared Marino with Microsoft and the Surface team. I'm a product knowledge trainer and have had the pleasure of speaking with a lot of different education customers throughout my time, but more importantly, I am thrilled to be able to interview today Yasmin London, the Executive Director of YSafe, an organization that is focused on empowering parents and teachers with tools to have positive online and technology experiences. Yasmin has been a police officer with the New South Wales Police Force for 13 years, and it is my privilege to interview her. Yasmin, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jared. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Now, as we are communicating, there will be a couple of ways that you can participate. We would love to take your questions. We'll have a live Q&A throughout the session and also at the end of the session. You can enter your questions in the Q&A box at any point during our time. But with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Yasmin, my first question to you is, who is responsible for this? There is a lot of responsibility on all sides, either from the parents or the school or even us at Microsoft. Who is responsible and what can they do to help?
Look, I think, Jared, you hit the nail on the head. It's absolutely everybody's responsibility. I don't think, any of us can justify saying, hey, school, this is your situation to manage, and the school certainly can't say the same thing to parents. We need to work as a team. We need to collaborate. We have children in, environments all day that are different, where we all have a duty of care to make sure that they're educated, they're equipped to manage their time online. When it comes to when, negative incidents happen, we know that a lot of the time that actually happens at home or outside of school hours. So, parents certainly have a responsibility to start to begin to understand why their children love the online world so much and empower themselves to participate in it with them. And certainly with schools as well, they need to provide the right products, the right environment and education to support children, not only in their school life, but on into the workforce as well. So it really is important for parents to take responsibility around that device protection within the home. And certainly that's an issue that I see in schools a lot. Schools will try to even provide products on behalf of the school to the parents, but the uptake by parents is often very low. So we need to work as a team. We need to understand that parental buy-in is part of that safety conversation and make sure that we take the time to make sure that those devices are protected and that they are effectively going to be safe for our children to use at all times.
So what are some of your recommendations for setting up that home-based filtering? Is that more on the device or the software level?
I think it's got to be both. There's options, in apps, in games that are available to parents to protect, that experience for their child. But the issue with that is that children have control. They can go in and change it if it's not suiting them. So we need to have it at two levels. We need to have a software that is going to protect the device that is in the control and hands of a parent. But I would say the first step before we even do that is that parents need to set up in their own minds, understand the importance and value that a software control tool or a technology can do to help them. I think, so often it's a bit of a hassle. Parents don't feel empowered when it comes to technology, certainly when it comes to, their children maybe knowing a bit more about the technology or the device or the platform than they do. And so they sort of throw their hands up in the air and go, oh, it's all a bit too hard. But if we invest the time, if we commit to finding the tool that's right for our family, our child, and doing our due diligence on what that might be, once we choose it, actually setting aside some time to set it up properly so that it is appropriate for the age of our child and the interests of our child and the needs for that child's education in terms of their learning environments, then it can actually be the most effective tool in a parent's toolkit to keep their children safe and make sure that there are better learning outcomes.
So this is a field that you know a lot about, and a lot of the parents that are here want answers for the children that they help. I'd love to understand, what is it that you are seeing since the onset of COVID-19 out in the field, and what is it that you're hearing from parents and students alike?
I think, one thing that we've got to acknowledge is that technology is an amazing tool. There's so many positive aspects to it. But I guess what we have seen throughout COVID is that with increased screen time, particularly screen time that is unmoderated or unsupervised, comes increased risk. So when it comes to things that we've seen with children, we've seen them being Zoom bombed, exposed to really inappropriate content, pornography. There's been a rise in cyberbullying style behaviours, even little things like an increase in ads, pop-ups and that consumerism that, kids maybe weren't exposed to in such high degrees. So certainly that's been the takeaway from COVID, is that the longer that we spend in front of a screen, the more potential for risk.
Absolutely. Emotional involvement, psychological challenges that students can face. Would love if you could outline, because the things that you just said are a bit scary, I'm sure, to hear for a lot of parents.
Yeah, certainly. I think, what we've all really learned through COVID is that innate need that we all have for human connection is alive and well. And it's changed the way that we interact online, particularly for kids. So when they are isolated, when they're not having that face-to-face contact, they're finding other ways to replicate that. So we've seen kids who, ordinarily wouldn't share a nude image doing that because they want to reinforce those relationships that they have with their partners, to establish trust. So those are really risky behaviours. We've seen cyberbullying occur in a lot of different ways, sometimes just through pure boredom because they're spending a lot of time online. Mum and dad are busy trying to keep their work life, afloat. And there's been some, entertainment style bullying that's happened as a result of that. And then of course, we're all feeling that sensitivity, that anxiety about the state of the world. And that certainly spills out into online environments when people are feeling a little bit upset with what's going on and maybe not as tolerant with the people that they engage with.
I'll say on our side at Microsoft, making sure that classroom experience, when it's at a physical location, we're able to manage it, we're able to control it physically as an educator. But on Teams, if that is the classroom, we have a lot of different things in place. Content filters, for example, that can be configured by the organization so that it can filter out things that could be considered offensive. Words that should have no place in a classroom can be set by the organization or even as a part of parental controls inside of it.
It's really fantastic to see, technology evolving with the way that kids interact online. That's one of the hardest things as parents to really keep up with, is understanding the nuances in their behaviours. And, when it comes to being able to identify bullying language, for example, with technology, that really removes one big barrier in terms of supervision when it comes to parents, and is really, really helpful in helping them manage their kids' online experiences.
Now, I know may or may not be your role to give, parenting advice, but for the parents who are watching, how can we instill that sense of social responsibility in children as they do interact with others online when we're talking about things like cyberbullying? What are some tips for parents who are saying, how can I get this through the head of my child to behave better online? Yeah,
look, I think we need to remove the whole terminology around our real lives and our online lives, because to our kids, they're all the same, okay? So the same behaviours need to apply. I think, the idea and the integration of the word safety in part of their day-to-day language is really important, and that's difficult with kids because they're apathetic, and safety isn't a sexy word that they want to think about when compared to something, that they want to do that's really fun. So, we need to get them to think critically about their safety, to, try to, analyse why a stranger might start to contact them and think about what they want. And that's a really, really difficult thing for kids because they don't really have that ability to support kids. Parents need to know a little bit about how to keep them safe and what to do if something goes wrong. So simple things like knowing where to report adverse incidents, as if it's to the platform or if it happens on, particular software where they can go to report a particular person or behaviour. The importance of removing cyberbullying commentary, for example, or images that a child finds embarrassing. That's a really important step that sometimes parents miss in that management sort of phase. They'll talk to their kids and they'll report things maybe in real life, but they forget to remove that negative comment from, that social media platform. And one thing that we know is that kids will look to that sort of action. How are we removing that so that other people don't see what someone has said about me?
So what are the risks towards the physical well-being?
Look, I think the physical aspect of what we call our digital well-being is a really growing area. We talk a lot about online safety, but how does that impact, our physical well-being? So, we're seeing technology and tools that are being developed that are really fantastic in helping manage kids' physical well-being. Headphones are one that comes to mind, a really, really popular tool, and one that ordinarily, as a cyber expert for younger kids, we would say to parents, try to refrain from using headphones because it makes it hard to supervise. But on the flip side of that, noise cancelling headphones can be a really great tool to help kids focus, to get in that immersive state if they need to study or they need to learn, but also to help them transition out of that. And it minimises things like tech tantrums, because our brain in that immersive state, if we're, dramatically or abruptly removed, where mum or dad says, it's time for dinner, get off, that sort of causes that sense of upset and that shock, I guess, neurologically. And so the ability to do that in a slow transition is actually really, really helpful for children and for learning.
Would love to hear a bit more about how this varied kind of environments play out throughout their day, because there's a tendency, I think, this is your kind of classroom, the child's room that they're in, and that's where you do everything, and then everything else outside might be home. Is it best to stick to keeping school in one spot, or is it better to have them move throughout the home?
Look, I think you've got to always go with what you feel is best for you or best for your child, and I think, the real leveler here is that not everybody has the luxury of having, a defined study space or area in their house where, they are able to get away and really focus. So it really depends on the setup that you have at home. But one of the things that we know is that our brain really likes to make associations. So creating some kind of defined zone where your brain is able to sort of switch into work gear or learning mode is really, really helpful. It's really good to keep that, where possible, outside of bedrooms, because our association with our bedrooms is obviously where we rest, where we sleep. And by doing work in there, particularly from a safety point of view, it's really difficult for parents to supervise, but also for a child, it really blends those two worlds of rest, and work, so it's important where we can to try and move that out. I think the other thing that we really need to focus on in this context is using the technology that's available to us to minimise distractions. So, turning off notifications, putting on do not disturb on devices, making sure that your phone, if you're studying or learning, is out of sight, because interestingly, we know that even by having a phone in our vision, we're distracted by thinking about not picking it up. So by learning a little bit about how our brain works and using that technology and the tools available to us, we can focus in a much more effective way.
Moving forward, the topic that is on everyone's brain when they think about children being safe online, parental controls. There is kind of that balance of, do I lock it down completely so that it affects their ability to even do some basic research? Or do I, assume that the school has some of those protections in place? I'm sure that this is something you talk about quite regularly. Would love to get your view on parental controls and how and when is the right approach to setting those up.
Well, parental controls are a necessity as far as I'm concerned, particularly with younger kids. But we really need to make sure that we adjust the dial with them in terms of our children's age. No parent of a 15, 16-year-old, for example, is going to feel confident that their child's going to accept a parental control going onto their device at that age. So, we want to try and make sure that we get them in the habit early where possible of having parental controls that will filter out inappropriate content, that will help us as parents control the time and access to certain information online. But as kids get older, we sort of lean more into those conversations around responsibility, expectations on behaviour. With young kids, we might do device contracts. With older kids, we might just have regular conversations around what they're doing, what they're seeing, how they feel in terms of their confidence in managing certain situations. So, it really is dependent on the age of the child and their interest in what they're doing, what they're trying to access, whether there's been an incident that you need to address. But certainly parents really do need to understand that these are tools that are going to help them, especially if they take the time to set them up the right way. It's like a car. If you fill it with terrible petrol and you don't give it any care and love, it's not going to run at its optimum. But if you actually take the time to set it up, you get it working, get it using the 98 fuel or whatever it might be, then it's going to run for longer and it's going to be much more effective for you.
Yasmin, thank you for that. Parental controls and keeping everyone safe is a big part of our Microsoft Family Safety app. That allows a great deal of control. That, of course, has content filtering as a part of it to make sure that they're seeing what they're supposed to be. And then, of course, monitoring things like screen time and the amount of time that they spend on their devices. Now, of course, if we're spending so much of our time learning from the screens, there is something to be said for having that time to disconnect. Would love it for you to share your thoughts there on screen time.
Yeah, certainly. Screen time is a really hot topic. What we want to really be teaching kids is to focus on the quality of the screen time rather than the quantity. So a lot of the recommendations are that anything up to, say, an hour a day for your average 10-year-old is actually beneficial when it comes to screen time. So parents can really, relax a little bit in terms of really being super strict. But we still, of course, need to pay attention to how our child is reacting when they jump off their technology. We want to make sure that they're doing things that they're learning rather than just spending mindless hours scrolling through a feed. Who are they following in that feed? How can they curate that feed to be really positive so that when a child jumps off, they feel good about themselves, not down about themselves because they've spent their last hour comparing their life to someone who is just putting their A-grade show reel up there. So we've got to teach them to think critically about what they're doing. We've got to get them to be mindful about their own use. That's our role as parents. There's the control aspect where sometimes we need to make decisions for them, but our role as parents and advocates is to get them to learn those skills themselves. So when they jump off a platform or a game, check in with yourself. How do you feel? Do you feel agitated or frustrated? Or do you feel relaxed? And getting them to talk about those feelings is something that can be really helpful with them self-identifying their own technology use.
So Yasmin, a topic that I know is near and dear to myself and you is equity among students. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the role that the device certain students are assigned or that they have available to them, the role that plays in their learning and in their interaction with others.
Absolutely. I think one of the really key takeaways throughout this COVID research that I've referenced today is that there was quite a lot of cyberbullying in relation to inexperience by certain students or certain children because they hadn't been exposed to certain programs, platforms or devices due to that inequity. So we had kids that had, years of experience using certain platforms that were really familiar on the same platform with children that had never heard of Microsoft Teams before. And, when they took their time or they made mistakes, they were made fun of. We saw, memes being made through screenshots that were taken without permission, for example, and spread across multiple platforms. Kids that were inadvertently exposed to inappropriate information because they didn't have privacy settings on, because they didn't know how to do that. So, equity is really important, particularly when we see that devices these days are no longer just school related and learning related and personal. They're the same thing. And so we need to make sure that every child is able to access quality technology and quality software and quality devices so that they can not only effectively learn, but also so that they're able to actually, be familiar with those products as they move into the workforce. So it is a really, really important piece of the puzzle.
If you could give an advice to a parent around, okay, someone has said something that my child is affected by and hurt by, what is that next step? Where do they go next?
Yeah, it's a really great question because, as parents, and you don't need to be a parent to feel that internal rage when somebody targets a child, we all feel that. But I guess the first thing that we need to make sure that we do is we need to relay to our child that we're there to help them and that we're on their team, that you're not going to make a situation worse by, intervening. And a really big part of that is asking a child, what is it that you want me to do? What's going to make this situation better for you? As a parent, it's really great to know some key things to action, to be action orientated. But certainly asking a child, what does a solution to this scenario look like for you? Often, as a police officer, I deal with parents who would get in touch with me over a cyberbullying incident and they'd want, a 10-year-old arrested for saying something nasty to their child because they were so, upset by what had happened, understandably. But the interesting thing was those two children that were involved in that incident, after a day or two, had kind of sorted it out. And it was the parents that were still enraged and wanted blood. So it's really important to check ourselves as parents and to make sure that we're guided by our children in terms of the management of these situations. But certainly making sure that they understand that, you're not anti-technology. That's something that will drive a wedge between your child and you. If they feel like you think all technology is bad, they're just going to assume that you don't understand what's going on for them. So, might be counterintuitive for a lot of parents, but trying to make sure that you relay that you understand that technology is part of their lives and that you think it's great, but sometimes they might, as children, need a little bit of extra help in managing negative incidents.
And we know that so much of those negative experiences can be driven by social media.
Yep.
And the fact that children have accounts often on social media at what seems to be younger and younger ages. However, one could argue that social media could be an important part of feeling like you're in a sense of community and interacting with others at a time when it's very difficult for people to feel that sense of connection when they don't have it at school. So where do you see that line between I'm taking my child all off of everything social media or free reign? There's a middle ground. Where do you see that?
It's different depending on the age of your child is the simple answer to that.
Course.
So, I really don't agree with parents that sort of say, I'm going to keep my child off everything for as long as I possibly can, because that's not actually helpful for them in developing their friendships, their relationships. As long as they are at an age where, they're not breaking rules or laws. So social media, for example, requires you to be 13. I would never recommend a parent sort of handing over a device and saying, here, jump on Snapchat, for example, under that age, despite the fact that we know that it happens. That's a whole other conversation. But, best case scenario, we're trying to avoid that. But certainly we've got to be with them and teach them how to use these platforms in healthy ways and understand that there will be things that go wrong, but it's okay because we'll know what to do in these situations and we won't let it go too far and we'll manage our own behaviours. So certainly social media and, the online world in general is a really important place for our children to be at the appropriate age, to have that digital literacy so that they can participate in, the workforce, the future world. It's going to require that of them. So preventing them or pushing it away from them is not going to work. And we also know that when we ban things, kids will find a way. And if something goes wrong, if they feel that they've been doing something that's going to get them in trouble, they're less likely to seek help.
As children are interacting in social media, and of course we're talking 13 and over, a good distinction there, but there's still that, I want more likes.
Yeah, look, an ongoing issue, and unfortunately one that doesn't have a silver bullet solution. Kids and adults really, they do get a sense of personal validation by likes and comments, and that's a neurological response again. We get a dopamine hit when somebody likes our comments or when we have some kind of engagement. It replicates human interaction. So our biology makes it really hard to ignore that part of our technology use. But I guess it's making sure that kids have positive self-esteem without it. So it's okay that they want likes and that they want follows, but that they're not basing their self-worth entirely on something like that, that they've got other aspects of their life that they feel that they're good at, that they can go to, real life friendships, for example, that they get meaning from. So it really is about balance. And I guess the other flip side of the conversation when it comes to profiles like that is, in order to get a maximum number of likes and comments and engagement, often kids will have public profiles, and that creates a whole range of other problems because we're allowing strangers into their lives. And if we look at a platform like Facebook or Instagram, where we have 1 billion monthly active users, Facebook close to 3 billion, that's people that we don't know entering their lives and able to collect information about them.
And they're doing it for reputation, right? What role does reputation play long term?
Yeah, aren't we glad it wasn't around when we were kids? I know I certainly am. But but look, you're exactly right. I think when we're striving to become TikTok famous or getting to that influencer level, children will often be predisposed to posting quite risque content or sometimes quite controversial content because it gets engagement. But the flip side of that is that if in 5-10 years' time they want to get a job, an employer can find that information. It's quite easy, and as technology evolves, we're seeing organisations using facial recognition technology, which is 98% accurate, and you can't just change your name and hope that won't be associated with you. It's your face that is attached to that content. There is AI being used, and it's quite accessible. As this technology evolves, it will become more accessible to more and more people. The other issue with this is that with open accounts, it's not just employers that are trying to find out about kids, it's people with ill intent. So we're seeing scammers that will go on to social media profiles and collect information that's going to be like gold for them to create a common ground with a child. So if a predator wanted to contact someone, all they've got to do is look through their photos or their comments, and they've got some great ideas of what to talk about. When it comes to even sextortion style scams, we're seeing Gen Z as one of the highest demographics that's being targeted because they think nobody cares about their content and they're prepared to post anything. They're not really that concerned about who sees it. They think it's just their friends that are looking at their personal information, and that's all they're really worried about. But there's a lot of other people that are viewing that content that they're just not aware of.
Yasmin, as we wrap up, I would love to hear from you the top 3 tips that you would have for either parents or education institutions as they're looking to adopt some of these principles.
Certainly. I think we got to keep it simple, don't we? So the first thing that I would always suggest is for parents control access, and that will be different depending on the age of your child. For young kids, it's having parental control tools. It's making sure that you have their passwords, that you have access to their actual device. You as a parent are entitled to that, particularly as they are younger. As we get older, we can try and sell even parental control tools to our older teens by stressing that they actually help them create good digital habits. So it's not so much about saying you can't go on a social media platform, it's actually using a tool to help them manage and regulate their time. So they might choose to use a screen time component of a particular platform to control how much time they're on study mode at night time, and to have something to blame, I guess, when they don't want to be on 15 different message platforms at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's shut them out. So, we can sell it that way, but certainly as parents, we do need to control access in certain ways. The next thing that I would suggest is always set boundaries. As parents, we're not going to hand the keys of a car over to a young person without teaching them how to stay safe or learn the road rules. So there are boundaries. We can give them freedom within confines that we set as parents that are going to keep them safe. We can do that via digital device contracts, for example, for younger or middle school kids, for example, where we talk about the rules. We set out the consequences of what happens if something goes wrong or there's poor behaviour. One of the things that I really love to do as well with kids, if they are begging or nagging for a particular app or game, is getting them to do the research, saying, okay, you put your case to me. You go and research Snapchat or TikTok. You tell me about the safety risks. You tell me about how to put on privacy settings. You tell me about the sort of content that you may be exposed to or what you choose to follow, and get them to put their case to you. They don't just get to wear you down over and over again. They've got to participate in their own learning. So that's something that can be really helpful for them to learn, but also for you as a parent to test the temperature on what they know and how ready they are for a particular platform. The last thing simply is openly communicate. Our kids need to feel that we're on their team, that we're not in opposition to them, because as I mentioned before, we don't want to drive a wedge between us as older generations and kids as younger generations. We might not know everything, but we're there to learn. And I really do believe that at this stage of the game, it's not a matter of whether we do technology at all. Parents might want to opt out. It's not an option anymore. It's really about how well we do it and how well we equip our kids to manage that technology in the future.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you who've been asking those questions throughout our session today. We'll move now to a bit of Q&A where Yasmin will answer some of those questions. Yasmin?
I've got a question here with a parent saying, what is the right age to give my child their first phone? And this is such a common question. Look, the answer to this is that there isn't a finite age, and lots of families give their children's phones for different reasons. It could be that they have, a 10-year-old that goes to and from school on the bus and they want to make sure that they're safe. And that's a very legitimate reason for you and your family, for your child to have a phone. But if I had to pick an age, generally that transition from 12 to 13 or year 6 to year 7, that time that they start high school, is a really good time to sit them down and talk to them about responsibility. They're going from, being a primary age student into the big world of high school. And with that comes responsibilities and trust as well from a parent perspective to a child. So, we certainly don't hand over a device without any controls, any expectations or boundaries around what they're meant to be doing with it. But generally that age group tends to be a good time to hand that over and see how they go. Here's another question. How do I talk to my child about distressing content that they may have seen? And look, this is another really common question, particularly in reflection of the TikTok incident that happened a couple of weeks ago, where we saw some really traumatic content on a public platform. Now, as parents, the first thing that we need to do before we talk to our kids about these issues is to calm ourselves. We've got to acknowledge that, parent or child, this is a really hard thing to see and it is really distressing. So trying to calm, yourself before you have that conversation. We want to make sure our kids feel that we're in control, that we have their back, that we're able to manage that situation. So they need to feel that sense of confidence from us as parents. Now, depending on the age of your kids, again, it's important not to go into too much detail. If they are oblivious, then it might be a situation where you don't raise it and get them asking questions about it. However, if they have seen a distressing video, for example, asking them what they actually thought they saw in the first place is a really good starting point. They might have seen a percentage of that video and not the really, really terrible part. Or they may have seen the whole thing. So getting them to explain to you what they thought they saw and what it meant. Making sure as well that they understand that there's a lot of people working to remove it, to make sure that it is not going to, have other children, other young people exposed to that. That there's people working to fix that situation, makes them feel supported. Making sure they know where to go if they need to talk about what they've seen. So certainly as parents, we support our children and we talk to them, but if they need extra help, we need to make sure that we destigmatise that and encourage them to go and seek help from professional counsellors, from psychologists if they need to. And there's a lot of anonymous places that they can go to as well that, they can speak to eHeadspace anonymously. They can speak to the Kids Helpline anonymously without actually identifying themselves. If they're not comfortable in that moment talking to you, you can give them a number, you can give them some details that they can go to and seek help from someone a little bit later on. Here's another question about cyberbullying, and this is a really, really great one because it allows me to, explain to you an organisation called the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner. Now, this question is how do I manage and how do I report cyberbullying? Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can manage this. The first thing as parents that we want to get in the habit of doing is reporting any incidents that are really negative or adverse or distressing to the actual platform. So we want to make sure that we're not skipping that step, that we're reporting a person or an incident to them so they can have content removed. But as we know, with lots of social media platforms and games with billions of people on there, sometimes things don't happen fast enough. And one thing that you can do as a parent, once you've reported that to the platform and maybe got no response, is you can go to the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner, which is Australia's overarching government body and key regulator. Now, they have a lot of different powers, a lot of great resources, but a really great thing for you to understand as parents is that if you report an incident to them that is, quite distressing, of a high threshold, they can actually act on your behalf as a parent or act on the behalf of the child to have that content taken down. They have a memorandum of understanding with every major social media platform and game out there that says that if something hits that platform and hasn't been removed, they can act on your behalf and make sure that that content is taken down, sometimes as quickly as 48 hours. So if you need quick, definitive action as a parent, get in touch with them and they'll be able to help you. Here's another great question. So, should I ban my children from technology? I think if you've watched this session, you'll probably know my answer to this is absolutely not. Banning is never the answer. What is the answer is helping our kids at the appropriate age and stage learn how to use technology in safe and healthy ways. So sometimes with younger kids, that might mean helping them with parental controls, as we've discussed, but certainly allowing them access so that they can become digitally literate. They can't spend, their whole childhood not using technology. And I'd feel sorry for you if you were a parent who really tried to implement that, because that would be so difficult. But it also isn't helpful for them. They need to learn how to use technology well so that they can really be effective as adults. When it comes to older kids as well, we know that banning things doesn't work, and that will probably just send them underground and finding ways around accessing what they want. It's far better to have open communication with kids around technology use, making sure that they know that you're on their team and that you're with them in terms of helping them develop those healthy habits.
Wonderful. Yasmin London, Executive Director of YSafe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely my pleasure. To all the parents out there, may the odds be ever in your favour.
Absolutely. Stay safe to you and your family.
You too. Thanks, Jared.